If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me and subscribe to me on all my other social media platforms. What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel. And it's been a little while since I've done one of these response videos to another series of videos out there, so this is a thread started up by the channel Analog Archives, which I just recently subscribed to, and holy crap, lots of killer content on that channel. So if you haven't checked out Analog Archives yet, go click the link in the description box below. This is a response to a contest video he put up for celebrating 2,000 subscribers. Congratulations, by the way. I know how hard you had to work at to get to 2,000 subs. I know that for sure, and I'm still waiting to get to the 4,000 mark and do my own giveaway. But, so Analog Archives did this thread video of 10 sophomore albums that are just as good or better than the debut. And I've thought about doing a video like this on the channel for a while, but I just never found a reason to make it until seeing this thread come up and about. Now, I haven't watched the original videos or the responses that have come out since, because I didn't want to get influenced by anybody when putting this list together. But I know, like, Metal Ben and Maze of Torments, they've done responses, but I haven't checked those out yet because I wanted to get my own list made. And here I am to present, for me, 10 sophomore albums that are actually, I would say, better than the debut for different reasons. And we're going to kick things off with one I just talked about in my last discography ranking for Anthrax, and that is Anthrax's Spreading the Disease. So I talked about this album at length during the Anthrax album ranking video a little over a month ago, which if you haven't checked that video out, go check it out. It was a fun discography to go through. But yeah, Spreading the Disease, 1985, Joey Belladonna enters as the frontman, Frankie Bello enters as the bassist, so completely new lineup compared to Fistful of Metal, and giant improvement, not just in the vocal performance, but also the songwriting and the production. Whereas Fistful of Metal, it was a really good debut. Definitely the vocals were a bit over the top for some people's taste, and the production was a little bit on the raw side. Whereas here, it's still raw, but it's much better in terms of the production, done by Carl Candy, or Canetti. I believe that. Either way, whatever. But yeah, songs got faster, heavier. The vocals, I think, were a lot more defined, as Joey is a far better vocalist than Neil Turbin, but the riffs just feel more impactful and they stick with you longer. After all, tracks like AIR, Madhouse, The Enemy, Gung Ho, like, there's a lot of memorable tunes on this album. Granted, it may not be as good as the follow-up, Among the Living, but in terms of great sophomore albums, that was like the big quantum leap from the debut. This is among the best of that bunch. So, yeah, Anthrax Spreading the Disease. Now, next up, we're going to go something far more extreme and dark, and that is Asphyx with Last One on Earth. So this is one of those I think will generate a little bit of debate, because there are the Asphyx fans who prefer The Rack. It's a fantastic debut album, but for me, Last One on Earth I think is far superior, especially when it comes down to production, tone, and the atmosphere. Whereas The Rack, definitely a Death Doom album, but you definitely had some more of those like hardcore, thrashy bits in there, whereas the Doom atmosphere I felt got perfected on this album with tracks like The Crusher, the title track, Streams of Ancient Wisdom, and even tracks like Food for the Ignorant, where the Doom aspects really come in hard. The thrashy, hardcore-ish moments still remain, but the Doom is far more prevalent on this album. and dare I say, the best Death Doom album of all time. Martin Van Drunen, his vocals, if you know anything about death metal or Death Doom, you know Martin Van Drunen's among the best vocalists in death metal history. But yeah, again, similar to Anthrax in terms of like songwriting, maturity, and even production, this one stands head above all when it comes to Asphyx. So yeah, last one on Earth. Alright, next up we're going to get a little black metal on here, and that is, for me, still my personal favorite Norwegian black metal album, and that is Darkthrone's Ablaze in the Northern Sky. Now, definitely trying to compare it to the debut album, Soulside Journey, kind of feels a bit unfair considering they went from pretty much a death metal band into embracing the Norwegian black metal sound within 2 albums. But as much as I love Soulside Journey, and it was in my top 10 for the Darkthrone ranking I did over a year and a half ago, this is still, in my opinion, the epitome of Darkthrone. After all, while the production, much more raw, but it was still really fucking good, as everything was pretty audible, even the bass was cutting through the mix pretty well, and just overall the songwriting dynamics just, whew, with Catharian Life Code and The Shadow of the Horns, Paragon Belial, The Pagan Winter, just every single track, you get great dynamics, memorable riffs, awesome like moments where they get doomy and then they'll get a bit groovy or even like blazing fast. So yeah, if you want to ask me the best sophomore album in black metal history, it would be this. No question about it. Darkthrone rules. If you haven't checked this album out, where have you been? Check it out. It's amazing. Alright, now we're going to get into probably one of the best out of this whole bunch, and that is Death Leprosy. After all, this album pretty much kicked off the entire Florida death metal scene. Scream Bloody Gore was an awesome debut, but definitely a little more on the thrashy side, but still death metal. But in terms of perfecting death metal's overall sonics, songwriting style, etc., this is the benchmark. After all, I've talked about this album so many times, I'll spare you the details, but basically, every single death metal album, no matter what subgenre it is, you will hear a trope or two from this album, just because, I mean, holy fucking shit. Like, you get triplet chugs, you get some blackened tremolos on the title track, you get thrashy bits, you got a lot of melody, some proggy bits, some technicality, maybe a couple of doomy nods. Just everything you will hear in death metal will have something from this album on top. So, in terms of probably among the most important metal albums of all time, which I could actually do a whole different video about that and see how far that goes, but this would definitely be near the top of that list. But yeah, Death Leprosy. Alright, and now next up we're going to be getting into some progressive territory, and that is Dream Theater's Images and Words. After all, I tried to do my best to include albums from some of my favorite styles of metal, and I noticed I didn't have anything prog, and I thought, well, that's a bit of a crime, so how about I go with one of the big ones, and that's Images and Words. Maybe not my favorite Dream Theater album, nor do I think it's the best, but it's definitely one of their best. I mean, after all, the introduction of James LaBrie on vocals definitely made a big, big change. Nothing against Charlie, I believe, Charlie Dominici. He's a hell of a vocalist, but kind of a little bit too high. Whereas James, far better vocalist, and he delivers some emotional moments. After all, Pull Me Under still remains one of the big progressive metal hits, but also Metropolis Part 1, Under Glass Moon, Take the Time, Learning to Live. Just eventually, whenever I have to rank the Dream Theater discography, it's going to be a lot of me going, son of a bitch! Because apart from maybe one album, maybe 2. Dream Theater's been a consistent band throughout their entire career. And I would say, if you were to ask me the best prog metal sophomore album, I could make an argument for Mastodon Leviathan, even though they still had a lot of the sludge metal in there. But Dream Theater, Images and Words, it's the biggest of the bunch, and again, similar to Anthrax, that quantum leap in terms of production and songwriting, it's like totally night and day. It's almost like 2 different bands. But yeah, Dream Theater, Images and Words. Alright, and then the next one, and this is another one of those important ones, and that is Iron Maiden Killers. Again, kind of going back to that example I used with Anthrax, that quantum leap from the debut to the sophomore album in terms of songwriting, performance, and production. This is one you could argue the biggest leap of them all, because the self-titled debut, it was a really good debut, but definitely lacked a lot that I love in Iron Maiden. It was definitely far more punky, but still very metal. Whereas this, you still get the punky bits, but the production. Martin Birch coming in as producer, and would remain the producer all the way up until Fear of the Dark, totally made everything sound a lot better. The songwriting got a lot tighter thanks to the introduction of Adrian Smith on guitars. And right out of the gate, the Ides of March and the Wrathchild, you know you're in for a hell of a ride, sonically and musically, when it came to this album. Also, Murders in the Rue Morgue, the title track Killers, Twilight Zone, Purgatory, Prodigal Son, just phenomenal songs. And this is really, in my opinion, the true beginning of Iron Maiden. Again, the self-titled debut is a great album, but Killers blows it out of the water, at least in my personal opinion. I know the debut has its fans, and I enjoy it, but in terms of production, songwriting chops, and the overall performances from each of the members, even Paul Di'Anno's vocals, far better on Killers. This is a hell of an album, one of the best sophomore albums of all time. Go listen to it if you haven't, and if you haven't, how the hell are you here? Okay, so we're about halfway through the list. Now we're about to get into some more heavy hitters. Next up, we get into the other band that gets compared with not compared, but goes toe-to-toe with Iron Maiden, and that is, of course, Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny. Again, that quantum leap from the debut in terms of all aspects, sonics, production, performance, and songwriting. Everything. After all, Rock'n'Rolla, bit of an odd debut. It was more of a hard rock album with some heavier moments, whereas Sad Wings, 2 years later, songwriting got more mature. The songs themselves, they got a little bit longer, far more dynamic, far more heavy, as this was really, as Martin Popoff would say, this was the moment this was the first time since the early Black Sabbath albums and Deep Purple in rock where heavy metal felt smart. As songs like Victim of Changes, Dreamer Deceiver, Epitaph, Island of Domination, like just every single track, absolutely incredible for different reasons, whether it be in the riffs, the guitar leads, the drums, the vocals of Rob Halford really shine on here. Victim of Changes and Dreamer Deceiver showcasing his entire range from his lower notes up to the Banshee yell, the metal god himself, and then like still keeping some aspects of the bands that came before, like Black Sabbath with some of the more kind of triplet swings or grooves, but definitely getting more into like the Jimi Hendrix type of vibes with the guitar work. But yeah, Judas Priest is a band I'm going to be ranking here in less than 2 months after I get done with Enslaved, which I need to get to work on listening to some Enslaved. But yeah, around Halloween, early November time, Judas Priest will be ranked, and don't be shocked to see this near the top. So yeah, Sad Wings. Alright, next up, now we're about to get into a few of my favorites. First, we get Megadeth P-Cells, But Who's Buying? I keep using this example, that quantum leap from the debut to the sophomore album, with production, songwriting, and the performances. Killing Is My Business is a hell of a debut. It's definitely a more gritty, raw, nasty-sounding debut. But in terms of the production, definitely didn't have much going for it. Whereas we get here to Peace Sells, they're on a major label now with Capitol Records. They get Randy Burns, who's a legendary producer, to produce this album, and the songwriting. It got faster at spots. It would get a little doomy in certain spots, but just everybody stepped their game up. Mustaine, Ellefson, Poland, and Samuelson absolutely killed it on this album. After all, you start off with Wake Up Dead, which is still, in my opinion, one of the band's most underrated songs. The title track, what more needs to be said about that? Good Morning Black Friday, where they showcase a lot of diversity in the songwriting, starting off on a more dark, melancholic sense, and then it gets a bit doomy, and then it gets thrashy and intense. Bad Omen, kind of the same deal. My Last Words, a hell of a closer. Top to bottom, this is pretty much a perfect album. It was ranked my number 2 overall for Megadeth, but yeah, absolutely fantastic sophomore effort from one of the legends of thrash, one of the big 4. Dave fucking killed it. Alright, and the penultimate album, probably out of the entire stack, maybe my favorite out of them all, and of course, it has to be on this list, Metallica Ride the Lightning. Now, unlike some of the past few albums I've talked about, not much of a quantum leap, but just in terms of overall maturity, Kill 'Em All is still an all-time classic, amazing debut. However, I think Ride the Lightning stepped up the songwriting up by a few notches, because, you know, you had more diversity in the songwriting, starting off with a nice acoustic intro, and then into full-on blazing thrash with Fight Fire with Fire. Ride the Lightning kind of going all over the map. For Whom the Bell Tolls, kind of like a nice triplet swinging, heavy, groovy punch of a track. Fade to Black, their first balladish song. I would say it's more of a dirge than anything else. Keeping on with the speed with Trapped Under Ice, Escape, Creeping Death, and their monstrous instrumental to Call of Cthulhu. I mean, top to bottom, this is a perfect album. Granted, Master of Puppets is still my number 1, but this is a very close number 2. Ride the Lightning, I've talked about Metallica to death on this channel. I feel like I should just spare the details and just tell you to watch my Metallica album ranking to understand more of why I love this band. But yeah, Ride the Lightning. And we conclude this video with another thrash classic. After all, we've talked about 2 thrash classics already. Well, actually, 3 already. Anthrax, Megadeth, Metallica. But let's end off with a German thrasher. And I had a hard time picking between Creator or Sodom for this. However, I wanted to go with the more underappreciated of the 2, and that is Sodom, Persecution Mania. I did my Sodom ranking. This was my number 1 Sodom album, over even Agent Orange and Tapping the Vein. But I went with Persecution Mania instead of, say, Pleasure to Kill by Creator, which I could have easily slapped onto this video. But I went with Persecution Mania because I feel it doesn't get enough love for the German scene in comparison to Pleasure to Kill when it came to the sophomore albums. But again, kind of a similar thing, quantum leap. Songwriting, far more tight. Now that you had Frank Blackfire on guitars, he was able to bring out better riffs, awesome guitar leads, and really pushing Tom and Chris to really go for it in terms of the songs. Nuclear Winter, still one of the best thrash songs, period. But you get some other great tracks like Christ Passion, Enchanted Land, the title track, Electrocution, the cover of Iron Fist, Bommenheigl, still a live staple of the bands to this day. And also Harris Johns on the production table. Granted, the mix is great and the production's great, but the mastering, like the volume, it was pretty low, so you have to turn this album up pretty high to be able to hear everything proper. But when you do hear everything proper, it does sound great. This is still my personal favorite German thrash album, still retaining a little bit of that first wave black metal vibe from Obsessed by Cruelty, but far more thrashy, not so much on the speed metal vein like Obsessed by Cruelty was. Definitely a straight up thrash album with some first wave black metal touches. But yeah, this is a phenomenal album. Check it out if you haven't. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for my response and my entry to this 2,000 subscriber giveaway challenge thing from Analog Archives. And like I said, I didn't see anybody else's videos because I didn't want to be influenced when making the list. But there are so many Sophomore albums I could have went with that that deserve to be on a list like this. But yeah, these were my 10, but if you are watching this video and you want to make a response, be sure to tag Analog Archives, so that, and also subscribe to Analog Archives to enter his contest to win, I think it's $60 that you can spend towards music, what have you. I believe that's the prize. I could be wrong in that. And don't forget, like I said, if you're going to respond, tag Analog Archives in the description box when you make the video. Or if you don't make a video but you just want to join the conversation, let me know your 10 favorite Sophomore albums in the comment section below. But until next time, keep your horns high and your dreams wet.